Hi everyone, I'm Natalia and welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to do something that I actually did 5 years ago. I just realized I started YouTube channel 5 years ago and then deleted all of my content, but it's been 5 years with my association and relationship with YouTube. But 5 years ago, I put together a little mini shadow work introduction video series on YouTube, and I want to recreate them because while I do have an online class that is very, very intensive, full module. When I say intensive, I mean it's a lot of material. It covers everything you need to cover if you're interested in doing shadow work using tarot and oracle cards. According to Carl Jung, in terms of understanding the concepts of shadow, individuation, ego, and integration. And it's a class that also not only shows step by step, but it teaches you my method of shadow work, which I call fishing, and my method of integration, and it walks you through the process. So I have this class. If you're interested, the link is below. Take a look at it. See for yourself. However, some people don't want the whole class, or some people are not in a position to buy the whole class. So for that reason, I thought it was important to create something where it gives people information, it clarifies some things, because there is a lot of, we all talk about shadow work and tarot. And to be honest, I think when people say shadow work and tarot, everybody means something different. There's almost no consensus because it means so many things to so many people, and people tend to do shadow work in all different effects. And I heard people suggest and advise and teach shadow work differently. Everybody does it differently. So there's no consensus, which is fine. I thought it would be important to do what I did 5 years ago when I came on YouTube, and that is clarify shadow in accordance to Carl Jung, who actually coined and created the concept of shadow and what is shadow, to help us all understand and have much more clarity, and then have that, perhaps for those of you who want to do shadow work, serve as an anchor from which you can then depart and get a little bit more creative and have a little bit more wiggle room in terms of how you conduct your own shadow work. I love this topic. I can't imagine not talking about this topic because I just know so damn much about just shadow and shadow work, not only because I do this and engage in it with myself periodically, and not only because I also have a very in-depth class on it that I created, but also because I got my doctorate degree in clinical psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute. And it's a mecca school for depth psychology in the United States. That's where I studied the works of Carl Jung, James Hillman, Marianne Woodman, Barbara Hanna, Freud, Lacan, you name it. Pretty much anybody and everybody who is residing within psychoanalytic and psychodynamic therapeutic modality. And this is a subject matter that is very dear to my heart. It's a subject matter that I continue to read on because it is fascinating to me. It is the only modality truly that appeals to me in terms of making sense of human behavior. Keep in mind, there's a lot of therapeutic modalities, but this is the one that appeals to me. And for those who actually don't know, and I speak about this on the channel because I think it's such an awesome connection. Kim Krantz, who has created our beloved Wild Unknown Oracle, as well as archetypal cards and the alchemy cards, also got her master's degree from Pacifica Graduate Institute. Hence her in-depth knowledge on archetypes, alchemy, which I find is just so rich and just enriches our practices with tarot cards. So I wanted to get on here, and I think this is going to be maybe 4 or 5 video series, where in this video, I'll talk about Carl Jung and explain some of the aspects of shadow. We'll talk about shadow work. And then in the next class, I have an outline here that I made, at least tangible so far. Why do we want to do shadow work? Why is it so important? Then I will talk in another video, a simple, basic way you can start doing shadow work with tarot. So some shadow work basics. The video on decks for shadow work, what I recommend, because I see people talk about decks for shadow work all the time, and I have a very strong opinion about it, and I would love to share with you my strong opinion in case if that might add something more to your practice. And if not, feel free to disregard it. And then finally, some of the shadow work tips. It's clearly not going to be as in-depth and in detail, and I'm not going to be sharing with you the phishing method that I developed because that is in a class that I do have for purchase if you're interested. But it is definitely going to give those of you who want to get started something to start with, and it's definitely going to give those of you who are already doing shadow work an additional layer, an additional depth information, additional that's going to bring to the table. 5 years ago, I created an 8-page PDF that some of you might even have. It's called Integrating and Accepting Uncovered Aspects of Self Within the Shadow. It's really good. It gives brief overview of shadow and projections, acceptance and integration of shadow self, and it gives some tarot spreads that I have created. It's the same tarot spreads, some of the tarot spreads, because I have a lot of tarot spreads I share in my class, but some of the tarot spreads that I share in my class. So this is kind of like a little tiny cheat sheet on getting started with shadow work if you want to. And I will be sharing this PDF in class number 3, where I'll be talking about shadow work. But today I wanted to get on here and I want to get started by clarifying and trying to understand what do we mean when we say shadow work and tarot. Well, it might surprise some of you, maybe it might not surprise the rest of you, but Jung himself, even though Jung did coin the term shadow, while Freud coined the term unconscious and the formation of ego, id, and superego, it was really Jung who looked at the shadow concept and collective unconscious as well within the structure of the human psyche. So it might surprise you that Jung himself has never used, as far as I know, I have never come across in any literature, and I have all of his collected works, he has never once used shadow work. He never refers to shadow work. There's no such terminology within Jung's lexicon, as far as I can tell. So I don't really even know who invented shadow work in terms of terminology, but it makes sense, right? Because you're going to be working on your shadow. You're going to be uncovering your shadow. Hence, it's shadow work. But keep in mind, these are not really Jungian terms. Jung, while he did discover and discuss the concept of shadow and the importance of shadow and the importance of working on uncovering what lays within the aspects of our shadow self. Jung himself was a person who thought it was really, really not only important, but vital to our human development to work on those concepts. And I know I'm using that word work, but he never used it. To work on our aspects of ourselves, to uncover those things. And the reason being is because so much of who we are resides in the unconscious. So there's our conscious self, which some people say conspires about 10% of your psyche, and then there's 90% that is unconscious. Now, of course, shadow does not equate unconsciousness per se, meaning shadow and unconscious are not one and the same. Shadow resides in the unconscious, but so do a lot of other things reside in the unconscious. So imagine that there's 90% within our unconsciousness of our sense of selves, who we are, our personalities, our attributes, our characteristics that we're not even fully aware of. I think that's actually quite almost a mindfuck concept to think about, that what we're conscious about is such a small percentage of who we are. So it's really important, according to Jung, to work on those aspects, to uncover what lies within and to make that which is unconscious conscious. Because as Jung says, our shadow selves, our shadow aspects, are supercharged with feelings and emotions. And we all know when we are behaving from that unconscious aspect of self, because we are almost always very emotionally reactive to somebody or a situation. And our reactions are almost always in the form of triggers wrapped up in projections. And so it's really important to bring them up to the surface, bring them to the light, examine them, and then integrate them into our whole personality so that we can continue to individuate into healthier, much more mindful, much more self-aware human beings. Of course, Jung and Freud are byproduct of their time, and during their time, that was a time when Freud invented talk therapy that became highly popular. And it was a time when most of their patients were women. It was a time when a lot of women were high-end clientele. They had wealth, they had money. They could afford psychoanalysis several times a week, even, to come to free associate and to work on their sense of self. Ideally, if Jung, I think today were to speak about shadow work, Jung would ideally say that it is a work that is best conducted in psychotherapeutic space where a patient has the ability to free associate, to have a free flow of speech where they can just completely free associate and talk in such free way where things can flow from the unconscious, and ideally a psychoanalyst will help the patient uncover shadow aspects of self, bring them to light, and then help the patient integrate them into their whole personality. Well, times are changing, and today, in my experience, therapy is a luxury. And I'm saying this as a psychologist in the space because I know that it's a luxury for a lot of us, because even though we have more insurance covering therapy, we all know that insurance doesn't cover enough. And because it doesn't reimburse providers enough, more providers than ever, such as myself, don't take insurance simply because the reimbursement we get does not match the quality and expertise value we bring to the table. And so for people like myself who work out-of-pocket basis, and again, it becomes even more of a luxury for people who actually are in position to pay out-of-pocket for psychotherapy. So it's really kind of double-edged sword because this work is so essential, and yet it is so not approachable. And it's a messed up world we live in today's healthcare system, unfortunately. Good news is, in my opinion, this work absolutely can be done solo. And I don't say this lightly or wishy-washy. I say this as somebody who does this work solo. And I say this as somebody who not only has done this work, but has done this work successfully with Oracle and tarot cards. And a lot of you who do this type of work know that it's more than adequate and more than possible to do this solo. Of course, there's always some pros and cons to doing things solo. If you're working on uncovering or healing something that is tied to something that is very traumatic, something that is very painful, something that, again, associated with a severe level of trauma, doing the solo may not be the best thing because you may fragment, you may fall apart. But again, we'll have to decide what our capacity to contain ourselves and what our capacity to go through things as we work through them. So while this work can definitely be done solo, and absolutely is to this day, let's remember again that Jung never really coined the word shadow work. Again, I'd be curious to know who ever coined it. I don't think we'll ever find out, but the word circulates all the time, especially in tarot community, especially around winter and fall and October. Shadow work, we're doing shadow work, best text for shadow work. People talk about shadow work all the time. And sometimes I'll watch some of those videos, and again, I notice that everybody does things so drastically differently. So if you're doing something that obviously works for you, wonderful, keep doing it. There's no need to change something that is giving you the results you're looking for. Now, Jung has written on shadow in this chapter. This is one of his collected works. This is volume 9, second book of the volume 9, which broken down into 2 volumes. And I will be reading for you some of the citations so we can clarify something, so we can understand some things better. Because sometimes I think there is a misconception between shadow work, at least in terms of shadow in understanding per Carl Jung, and shadow work without the deeper understanding of Carl Jung. Because in my experience, doing shadow work in terms of how Jung saw shadow with tarot and oracle cards, it's not just a matter of throwing cards and asking, what is in my shadow? If you ask a question of the cards, what is in my shadow, and just throw 3 cards, you're not going to get any clarity, because there's many things that reside within your shadow, and you may have no idea what the cards are telling you. And in class 3, I will tell you why having a projective moment or triggering event is so important, and then bringing in cards is so essential. So I'm going to share with you some of the resources today. One of my favorite resources is Daryl Sharp. This is a short book. It is basically called Jung Lexicon, a primer of terms and concepts. If you especially like reading Jung, if you're interested in reading Jung, this is great because it will break down a lot of Jungian concepts, projections right here, objectification, numinous, individualism, individuation, all the Jungian terminology, father complex, fantasy. So it's really good primer. And in this primer, excuse me, Sharp does a great job on covering shadow. And I would like to highlight some of the things he says, because this is really important when it comes to shadow. And if you're doing shadow work with tarot and oracle cards, I think it's really, I'm like dancing with my bangs. I think it's really important for all of us to understand that there is one of the misconceptions I hear is that the pieces that reside in the shadow are bad, are pieces that are not good. And Jung never said that. Jung was always very, very clear that he even said something to the extent of there's gold within your shadow, because not everything that resides in the shadows that we have repressed and stuffed into the shadow parts of our psyche are bad. Some things are culturally reinforced ideas and concepts that have told us that this is bad, taboos, things related to sexuality. For example, if you grow up, and still, this is still to this day happening, but if you grow up, especially during a time when people were incredibly homophobic, and your sexual preference was towards the same sex-identified, gender-identified individual, then you would most likely would have repressed this part of yourself in the shadow, because society and the world was telling you and sending you strong messages that this part of yourself is bad, shameful, and should not be visible. As we know, there's nothing wrong with one's sexuality towards especially the same sex partners, same gender partners. Absolutely nothing wrong. That's just absolutely natural part of us being human beings. But this is one example how parts of the shadow are not always bad. And Sharp here goes on by quoting Jung by saying that hidden or unconscious aspects of oneself, both good and bad, which the ego has either repressed or never recognized, constitutes shadow. So as you know, it's both good and bad aspects of who you are that your ego has repressed or never recognized. Repression happens when we are aware of something. Our ego realizes, oh, this is a no-no, so it represses it, pushes it down because it cannot bear to have it in its orbit, simply put. And then there's shadow aspects that ego has never even recognized, that have never even come to the surface, that have never even been seen a light of a day. So imagine what might be there about yourself that you're not aware about. This should give you so much excitement to dig deep into yourself. At least I hope it would. Let's see, what else do I want to quote in here? Here, Sharp goes on to say, the shadow is composed for the most part of repressed desires and uncivilized impulses, morally inferior motives, childish fantasies, and resentments. Example, all those things about oneself one is not proud of. This unacknowledged personal characteristics are often experienced in others through the mechanism of projection. And I'll talk more about projection in lesson 3 and why it's so important, because as you can see, we experience little, how would I say it? We experience little snippets, little teasing, little view of our shadow selves in projections of others. When we project onto others, that's when we experience it. But it's really important to note that not all shadow aspects are bad. Again, very, very important. And again, to reinforce that point, let me cite Sharp one more time. The shadow is not, however, only is a dark, undesired underside of the personality, which absolutely it also is. It also consists of instincts, abilities, and positive moral qualities that have long been buried or never been uncovered, never been conscious. So there might be all of these positive, great qualities, creative aspects of you, potentials residing within yourself that have never been uncovered, that are just sitting there within, trying to be discovered. So this is a great lexicon if you want, and I quote quite a bit of it in a handout that I will offer in lesson 3, because it's such a great quote. It's so clear and concise, and it really helps us understand what shadow is. Because sometimes I think people think they're doing shadow work in accordance to what shadow is per Jung, but if you're already conscious of something, if you're conscious of some shame element or guilt, that means that you are not uncovering that shadow, because that's already uncovered. Then you probably most likely what you're doing is you're working on integrating it, or at least you're working on trying to understand it on a deeper level. So it's slightly different things than what we're talking about. So this is really a great lexicon. I'll link it below in terms of a reference, because it's so good. Jung has a chapter. You don't have to buy this book. He does have a very brief chapter on the shadow. At least in this book, it's 2 pages long, but he has written on it in other texts as well. And he says here, I highlighted, the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. For no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. He emphasizes that this is not easy. To become conscious is not easy. It takes a lot of moral effort on our part, because our ego has repressed and has stuffed down those things deep inside, because it doesn't even want to integrate it, because it doesn't want it to come to light. So that's why to engage in a process of figuring this out and knowing what it is and then integrating it is a very huge responsibility that bypasses ego. It's almost like a responsibility of your big self with a capital S. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real. This act is essential condition for any kind of self-knowledge, and it therefore, as a rule, meets with considerable resistance. So there's a lot of resistance from the ego coming when you start doing this work. And if you take in my class, you know that I cover that as well, because it's so important to know and to recognize when resistance comes up. Let's see, anything else that I want to quote from Jung? Okay, so I think that's it from Jung. So these are really, I really like Sharp, especially if you reading some other Jung works and you want that lexicon. Now, another book that is classic, and usually if you are in psychotherapy and you want to start working on your shadow yourself, a book that is almost often recommended is Robert Johnson's short book called Owning Your Own Shadow, Understanding the Dark Side of the Psyche. It is short, it is to the point, it may not necessarily tell you how to do the work, especially with tarot and oracle cards, but it will lay some of the foundations. And again, this is a very classic text, almost always recommended. It has only 3 chapters: the shadow, romantic love as shadow, and the mandorla. So this is something that you may have become familiar with because it is so often recommended. I can't say I would not recommend it because I'm just so familiar with the concept. For me, this is way too introductory. Another one that I really enjoy is Barbara Hanna, Inner Journey Lectures and Essays on Jungian Psychotherapy, Psychology. As you can see, highlighted a lot out of it. And I do like it. And here, Barbara also has a chapter on ego and shadow. She has chapters on a lot of other things, on active imagination. She has some glimpses of individuation process in Jung himself, because she worked with him, regression or renewal in later life. So I think it's a very interesting text, especially if you want to go deeper. And I'll link all of these books below. But for now, for this particular first video, what I really just wanted to do is I wanted to lay down most important things in regards to shadow in accordance to Carl Jung. And one of them is that it is hidden unconscious aspects of oneself that are both good and bad. Very, very important, because a lot of times people think shadow is all bad. And another thing to lay out that Jung has never talked about shadow and shadow work. That is our invention. He did definitely talk about shadow uncovering and integration. I think the most common term he used is uncovering. But understanding these concepts, if we're working with them properly, I think is really important. They're going to anchor your work. They're going to anchor what it is you think you're doing. They're going to anchor what it is you think you're looking for. And when you get the PDF guide in lesson 3, you will be able to, as you look through the quotes that I have, it's going to give you an even more understanding of what it is, because this work is so, so important. And if we're going to do it with tarot and oracle cards, we might as well do it with a better grasp and better understanding. So I'm going to cite these books below. And I look forward to the rest of the basic introductory lessons, because I think this work is so instrumental to our development. And I also think that, as many of us know, it is very possible to be able to utilize this using tarot and oracle cards. So comment below, what is your understanding of shadow? And when you do shadow work with tarot and oracle cards, what is your goal? And how do you go at uncovering and discovering the aspects of your shadow self? And I will see you all next time. Goodbye.